Thank you for joining us today in Jennifer Schaus and Associates complimentary webinar series. We're coming to you live from Washington, D.C. today. This year on Fridays, we are covering procurement playbooks. We will take a deep dive into doing business with the agencies and departments with our panelists. On Wednesdays at 12 p.m. Eastern, we will cover the FAR supplements or procurement regulations for the agency and department. Fridays, we will cover the business development and marketing aspects of the corresponding agencies and departments. The full schedule and the sign-up links are on our website. We would like to take a moment to thank our sponsors. Virginia PTech at GMU offers free one-on-one counseling to firms in Virginia on federal, state, and local procurement topics. Online resources and group trainings are free with no restriction on business location. If you are interested in learning more, please use the links provided to explore what PTech can offer. And a special thanks to our sponsor, the Federal Business Council. The FBC creates and manages virtual and in-person meetings and events to contract appropriate industry and government thought leaders, product providers, and solutions with government programs that use them. The FBC works with mission-specific programs for a variety of agencies to connect government and industry in the form of in-person and virtual conferences, training events, policy dialogue, and outreach. Over the last 40+ years, FBC has become a comprehensive resource for connecting industry and federal government. Looking to connect with government and military decision makers? GovWhitePapers.com is a free resource for the public in supporting industries to find, post, and promote government and military-related content. Stay informed on topics like Air Force, cybersecurity, COVID-19, AI, education, defense, and more. Plus, upload your organization's content for free to boost your website traffic and exposure in the government community. Our B2G advertising options connect you with our targeted military and government audience, including premium content subscriptions that provide gated content promotion, plus lead delivery directly to your inbox. Claim your free membership on govwhitepapers.com today to get started. Today, we are covering doing business with the U.S. Air Force. Let's meet our panelists. We want to thank our friends from FedMine, Ms. Archisa Mahan. Great to have you with us, Archisa.
Hi, good to be here. My name's Archisa, and I'm the Senior Product Manager at FedMine, a GovSpend company. Thank you, Jennifer Schwartz and Associates, for including us in this very helpful webinar series. I'm glad to be here with the McLean Group and Air Force, and a big thanks to our sponsors.
Thank you, Archisa.
Yep.
Apologies. And we are unable to have a government point of contact from the U.S. Air Force today, although we will be providing information on how to do business with the Air Force in the upcoming slide. We would also like to thank the McLean Group for joining us and providing an M&A perspective on the movers and shakers within the agency. Thank you, Jamie, for joining us today.
Appreciate it. By way of introduction, I'm Jamie Agnew. I'm an associate at the McLean Group. For those that don't know, middle market investment bank focused on government contracting space. Looking forward to the discussion today, and again, thanks to Jennifer Schaus and Associates and all the sponsors today for and all the attendees for the time.
Thank you, Jamie. And now we will look at business opportunities and outlook. Archisa, the floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So FedMine is a federal market intelligence platform that integrates the 18 federal data sites into one easy-to-use platform to allow unmatched reporting and analysis. So we were recently acquired by GovSpend and are now part of GovSpend, which is the largest provider of data on the state, local, and educational market. Next slide, please. So today we are focused on the U.S. Air Force. I always believed, and what we've seen from the most successful companies is that as you start wanting to look at or enter or grow within a specific agency or bureau, it is very important to understand what is and focus on that agency. What is it buying? How is it buying? What are the trends? Because this really helps us understand and gives us the valuable insights that are needed to plan our business development strategy and understand what opportunities are out there for us to focus on. The US Air Force, as we all know, is one of our top agencies. Last year, so the last fiscal year, FY21, they actually awarded about $81 billion to little less than 14,000 companies. In terms of dollars, it's a rise of about 2% over FY20, as you can see on the slide. Wherever possible, I have presented links to reports which you can easily download and see. And when you look at that report, you will see that Boeing, Lockheed, Raytheon are your top primes for FY21 and account for more than 25% of the contracts that actually were awarded. Next slide. When I look at the small business contracts, because most of us, in terms of understanding further how does the agency purchase from small businesses, we had about $15.4 billion that went to a little less than 10,000 companies. So that is a large number of companies when you look at the total amount of companies. Interestingly, when you start looking at the NAICS codes, and we'll delve in further, the NAICS codes are for small business contracts are more on R&D, engineering, and commercial construction. You could also see that the top companies here include hardwood products, Oasis, and applied research. So always helps to break out what's happening, how much is going to small business, what are they purchasing, how are they purchasing, even from our small businesses. So next slide. With the pandemic, you will know, especially if you've attended a couple of our other webinars, I've always focused in on, the contracts that are being awarded under the National Interest Action Code. And it is interesting to see the trends, right? Like in some agencies, you see that the contract awards have increased year over year under the COVID-19 NIA code. In this case, it has actually decreased from the previous year, where this FY21, we had about $1.6 billion that were awarded under the COVID-19 NIA code. They've awarded to 425 companies, and less than 57%, so almost 57% was awarded as small business contracts, which I think is amazing. And of course, if I start analyzing, the NIA action code results, the top NAICS include surgical appliances, R&D, and medical laboratories. The other thing that we also want to start looking at, in addition to OTAs, which I haven't looked at, and for Air Force, but is to look at the SBIRs and the Sdtr programs. This is increasing year over year, depending on the agency and the mission of that agency. Last year, more than $1.3 billion was awarded as SBIRs and Sdtrs, and I was thrilled and amazed to see that 90% of these awards were awarded as small business contracts. So if you are in the technology field, I would highly recommend you look at these awards, see who's winning them, but also track what's happening, track the broad agency announcements and things like that, and see if there's ever an opportunity for you to apply for the SBIR and Sdtr type of programs. Next slide, please. When we start, again, when we are looking at an agency, of course, we want to see what an agency is doing at the top level, but you also want to get into the bureau levels, and even in some cases, get down to the base level and get a better understanding of what is happening in that specific MAJCOM or command or base. For FY21, you could see that while the material command definitely does the bulk of the contracting, we are seeing an increase in the Air Force Space Command spend, right? And this again ties in, if you've been following the Air Force, and some of you know it better than me, you will see an increase in the spend that is taking place. And that is, yeah. So I always like to break it up by MAJCOMs where possible to get a better understanding an appreciation of where the spend is. Next slide. So looking further into our NAICS codes and PSC codes and set-asides, when I look at the total Air Force, aircraft manufacturing, R&D, engineering, guided missile are all part of our top industry. Of course, if keeping in mind that a lot of the contracts are going to the Lockheeds and Raytheons, the set-asides that are really being used by the agency are small, but they are substantial when we start looking at how the agency has set aside contracts for small businesses and 8As and women-owned small businesses, which is always nice to see. So pay attention also to how the agency is purchasing in terms of its set-asides and how it's doing in terms of its goaling. So next slide. So when I always like to go into the small business piece of any agency's trends. And again, if I'm looking at their purchases for small business, and this is where the contracting officers made a determination that the contract is, the business is a small business. You could see your top NAICS code as for small business contracts, engineering, commercial, R&D, facility support services. So this is a nice mix of NAICS codes, keeping in mind how the agency is buying. The top prime contractors in small business, Hardwood Product Company, Oasis Systems, Applied Research. Again, nice. It's a nice mix of companies and the products that they are selling when we're looking at our small businesses. Next slide. One of the things that I have started doing more and more, because I think it really helps us get a much better idea of how an agency is purchasing, is actually looking at the categories based on GSA's category management. And this is really based on looking at PSC codes. What you could see on this slide is the spend on the top 5 categories, and we've further broken it down by small business and other than small business, so that you get a much better appreciation of how the Air Force is buying and what is going under small business and other than small business. And again, it's nice to see professional services is your major category, and you can see more than 20% is being awarded as small business. Obviously, things like aircraft is going to be mainly large businesses, and very little is going to go as a small business contract. So again, use the categories to get a better understanding. They do give you sometimes, I believe, a lot more valuable insight than what you would get by just looking at NAICS codes or PSC codes. So next slide. As part of understanding the trends and as agencies use more of start purchasing based on strategic sourcing and all of these new initiatives, I think it's also important to understand how is an agency using all the various vehicles that are out there. This is, of course, there's a lot of purchasing that's happening on GSA schedules, but also let's look at what's happening on these major vehicles and best in class or, various tier type vehicles. So interestingly, look at Air Force, there is a lot of OASIS pools, small business and not small business pools. Also, a lot of NASA SOUP type of contracts that are being awarded or being used, which again makes sense, if you start understanding the agency, and there's going to be a lot of parts and things like that. So why is this important? As a small business, I want to understand, 1, how is an agency purchasing? 2, do I need to get on these vehicles? And how do I do that? What are my teaming opportunities here? What are my subcontracting opportunities here? So this all really helps you get a better understanding, and hence I always like to tell people, look at your top vehicles that any agency is purchasing. Of course, put in your keywords, use NAICS codes to fine tune the results, and you might see, vehicles that are not listed on this list, just because it's more focused on the type of solution or product that you're selling. Okay, so next slide. So once we've understood an agency and understood the trends, we now want to start looking at how do I use the information that I have gathered to create the opportunities for myself. Opportunities, as we know, are, of course, based on the new initiatives that an agency has, which is truly dependent on, the agency's need and the funding and budget. But it's also based on contracts that are expiring that could possibly be recompeted. Now, where do you get that information? Have a look at the budget and program informations. There is so much of information out there that provide you good insight and thought into what are the agency's top missions? What is their focus for the next 1 year, 2 years, 5 years? Plan your strategy based on all of that information that you read. And I always would encourage you to have searches set up just for pre-solicitations and sources sought notices, specifically at an agency level or base, things like that, because this is, again, going to, allow you to respond to them. And, a lot of them are done for market research. So you do want to make sure you respond. Now, we did see that the Air Force does do a lot in terms of SBIRs and Sdtrs, and a large percentage of it goes to small businesses. So if you're a small business in the R&D type of arena, I would tell you also track the BAAs and the SBIR requests and things like that might come out. So you want to be saving searches for that. Create your expiring contract searches. Be very specific when you're creating these searches. Use keywords, use socioeconomic status, use set-asides, filter these results to the level that you want to go to, because again, it just helps you be more focused in your strategic business development. If you are on an IDIQ or a GVAC or a GSA schedule, create expiring contract searches based on just for those vehicles. Again, helps you understand, be focused, helps you create the possible opportunities, and allows you to be ahead of the curve and be more strategic in creating your pipeline. Next slide. So the other thing that you want to really look at, especially if you're in the IT field, is look at an agency's Exhibit 53s, which provide you the top initiatives that are at an agency. And they also will allow you to look at what is the budgeted IT spend, which helps you, again, understand and be more focused as you're talking to the agency, as you're understanding the agency, as you're realizing how can you help the agency based on what you do and what the agency's needs are. So Exhibit 53s provide a lot of valuable information, specifically when you want to look at the budgeted dollars that are there for that initiative. Exhibit 300s also provide a lot of good information, including, how is that CIO, what is the status of that IT initiative, or, who is the program manager. So those are things that I always will encourage you to look at. Next slide. And then, of course, we talked about expiring contracts. So this is a quick search of all the contracts that are expiring in the next 12 months at the Air Force. And this specific search is just looking at contracts that were awarded as other than small business. And I have more than $119 billion worth of contracts that are expiring in the next 12 months. And as you can see, again, aircraft manufacturing, engineering, R&D, guided missiles are all of the top NAICS codes that are expiring. Next slide. And if I start looking at the companies and the contracts that are expiring, no surprises. We see Boeing, Lockheed, Northrop, Raytheon, United, all having the top contracts with, and you could see the dollar amount of those contracts that are expiring. So go ahead and give me the next slide, please. I can do a similar search on the small business side. And again, now when you start looking at the NAICS codes on the small business side, they're pretty different, but gives you, with pharmaceutical, commercial, and R&D being your top NAICS codes. Also have a look at the set-asides that are being used in small business. So while the bulk of the contracts that are expiring are not really set aside, you do have a pretty large portion of contracts that are small business set aside or 8A sole source and completed. So again, this sort of helps you when you start doing your searches based on your socioeconomic categories too. Next slide. Here's the list of all the contracts that are expiring that were awarded as small business. The top one is the Moderna vaccine contract that I guess is expiring in the next 12 months. But again, the other companies are a nice mix of R&D, construction, things like that. So gives you, yeah. So the next slide. This is a quick look at your top opportunities that are made public. I would tell you, save your searches, follow your opportunities, always respond to sources sought and pre-solicitation notices. A lot of this is done for market research, so please do make sure you follow them and respond to them. Next slide. So I sort of wanted to end by, talking a little bit about the budget. So we looked at an agency, we looked at how the agency is spending, how does that translate into contracts that are expiring, looking at new opportunities that are coming out, looking at pre-solicitations and sources sought, look at BAAs and, track the SBIRs and things like that. But ultimately spend time and look at that agency's budget and what it's, what is the plan for that agency. So quick look, some of the Air Force budget highlights that I found interesting was that there is an increase in the Air Force budget by less than 3%. What I found interesting was that, the total force strength was projected to be increased by about 3,400 people, of which almost 2,000 was in the Space Force arena. So that again tells you that the Space Force is an area of growth for the Air Force. You could see that the budget for R&D has also increased. Milcon has increased also. But what I found most interesting was that, the Space Force operations and maintenance budget has increased by 3.4, but the R&D test and evaluation budget has seen the largest increase, I think, of almost 3 billion. So keep in mind how the agency's future is looking. So I would advise anyone that, to spend time and read the budget and get a good understanding of that. And the Air Force actually has got some really nice quick looks at budgets and things like that. And I have put in a link to the Air Force budget page, so feel free to use that too. And I think that's it for me. Again, my contact information is in the slides. If you guys have any questions, specific questions, feel free to reach out to me anytime. Thanks.
Thank you, Archisa. And now we will look at an inside perspective from the government. Again, as noted, the slides will be available on SlideShare and will be sent out. So all links in the following slides you will have access to. Here is a link to the main agency department for Air Force and also a link to the Air Force Small Business Office. Here is a link to the acquisition forecast for Air Force, as well as the SBA scorecard for the Department of Defense. Our point of contact from the Air Force also gave us a link to government industry events and industry days for Air Force small businesses. And our point of contact also gave us some best practices for businesses that would like to do work with the U.S. Air Force. The first step is to reach out to the small business director, then inquire and participate in opportunities to learn about government. And then number 3, review and understand government requirements. Number 4, schedule meet and greets, capability presentations with the small business director and requirement owners, and prevent relevant capabilities and experience when given the opportunities. And number 6, be prepared and be persistent. Again, a link is provided to do business with the Air Force. And our point of contact is Yolanda McCain. She's the Director of Small Business Programs. Here is her email and her phone number. And now we are going to move on to M&A activities within top contractors. Jamie, the floor is yours.
Appreciate it. Yep. So by way of background on the McLean Group, we're a middle market investment bank headquartered in Tysons Corner, Virginia. Been in business for about 25 years. And as you'll see, we have kind of 2 main avenues of support. One is through our business valuation practice, which is the largest in the Mid-Atlantic, doing about 400 valuations per year, and kind of going up and down the scale in terms of who they support. Up at the top with public companies and SEC filings, all the way down to small companies and supporting kind of estate and gift planning, stock option plan valuations. But I think it's a differentiator for the McLean Group. It gives us, a lens into tons of transactions that go on across a wide array of industries. And so we get a pulse on, a broad market. And that supports the other side of the business, which is the M&A transaction support, which is the side that I focus on. Within that, we do a majority of sell side M&A support. And then as you see that we're focused on a few specific markets there, primarily defense, government services, and intelligence, as well as physical and cybersecurity and critical infrastructure. Certainly within that practice, we're working with a lot of founder-owned and operated businesses and helping them kind of realize their exit strategies and ultimately, exit and sell their business. So you can go to the next slide, please. Great. So I figured today, given the conversation around the Air Force, it would be, most relevant to focus on a recent transaction that we supported in the current market, in the Air Force market. You all might be familiar with this transaction, but in October of last year, CGI acquired Array, and we supported and advised, on the seller's side, which was Array. For background on Array, they're a leading application and digital services provider for the DoD, but as Arkisha kind of mentioned, they also had a real focus on Air Force and Space Command within that. So they were, kind of following some of the key trends that Arkisha touched on in terms of where dollars are being spent and focus is being, where the focus is within this agency. From a capability standpoint, they focused on enterprise solutions, software development, systems engineering, and then, application modernization kind of more broadly. And as stated in the slides, directionally, they're about $50 to $75 million in annual revenue. I think it's important to kind of note that there are a couple key drivers that, we played up in the marketing process and really where the buyers dug in terms of some of the value add that they saw in the acquisition opportunity. The first of which is the deep experience and technical capability that Array had. They had a strong focus on kind of legacy system sustainment, integration, and modernization, and this included specific expertise in Cobalt to Cloud. And then coupling that with an attractive customer base, they had a very embedded relationship with the Air Force as well as other DoD logistics systems. But within the Air Force specifically, about a 16-year history within those systems. And so, they have that. That's not something you can kind of build up on day one, and they had cultivated this over almost 2 decades long of support. So And then lastly, I think they were also at a unique point in their growth trajectory where they had some recently awarded contracts that provided a great deal of revenue visibility and backlog, as well as they were on the back end of a successful full and open transition strategy, where they had kind of grown over the past 3-4 years of their portion of full and open revenue from about 10-15% 3 years ago or 4 years ago to over 90% by the time they were in 2021. So that successful transition, I think was another key attribute of the deal. In terms of where buyers saw value in this and what was driving the value of Array was not really just one of those items. It was more of the combination of the three. And I think that's an important takeaway in this, from this slide in general, is that there's a lot of different aspects of what drive value in an acquisition standpoint, and a lot of times it's normally a combination or a culmination of multiple facets that drive that value. So definitely something that is unique, and we go into a little bit more in the slides here. Next slide, please. So on this slide, just wanted to kind of touch on some recent transactions in the space that we've been tracking, as well as maybe some more of the broader key trends on the bottom there that we've seen over the past year and a half, and kind of throughout COVID. Starting in the top left, news this week on the Lockheed Martin Aerojet Rocketdyne acquisition. It was actually terminated. Lockheed had to call off plans to acquire Aerojet Rocketdyne, amid opposition from antitrust enforcers. The FTC had sued to block the deal in late January, and it was announced earlier this week that the about $4.5 billion acquisition was terminated. So it was an important news point this week. But I think it's something going forward to keep in mind as as some of these larger mergers occur, they do face a lot of scrutiny, one from regulators and the FTC, as well as other competitors. And in this case, it was Raytheon, some of the leading competitors that we see in the space, and the fear that acquisition or merger would have kind of created unfair domination in the fuel rocket motors market. Moving to the right there, another one is the announcement of the completion of the Amentum acquisition of PAE. This has been in the news a fair amount and gone back and forth of, one from early on in the news cycle, but it was finally completed this past week. It was about a $1.9 billion acquisition, and it came about a year after the DynCorp acquisition. In terms of background on both those companies, PAE was publicly traded, and they focus really primarily on kind of two avenues. One, global mission services, which included infrastructure management, force readiness, and logistics. And then they also had another business line focused on national security solutions, which was primarily around the DoD and specifically the IC. And that division is really built out through M&A and multiple acquisitions in that front. Rationale for the acquisition was that Amentum, who was backed by a private equity firm called Lindsay Goldberg, wanted to build out their national security practice, and PAE was a great opportunity to do so. And I believe I saw a stat recently about the combined size of the entity and something along the lines of about a $56 billion backlog. So kind of using M&A, inorganic growth as a way to kind of move up the food chain in this case. And then all the way on the right there, the last one that I'll probably highlight before jumping into some broader trends is the Aeon acquisition of MTS and Merrick Group. Aeon was a portfolio company of Enlightened Capital. MTS is a professional solutions firm that's focused on manufacturing and engineering services for aerospace defense markets. And then Merrick Group was a human capital management and business execution software solutions provider, primarily to aviation law enforcement markets. Rationale for the acquisition was around expanding Aon's technical capability, as well as adding engineering expertise to a suite of cloud-based products. I think that's the last two there certainly are part of a larger trend that we see or have been seeing in the market, which it really is around the prevalence of kind of capital from both public and private institutions, but primarily private equity firms in the space. Dating back to the beginning of COVID, as we've discussed in I think previous series, right when COVID hit in March of 2020, there was about a quarter at which a lot of, regardless of where deals were in the process, they all kind of froze and went on hold until there was more clarity around the future and what that entailed. I think as a result of that, we saw a large, a lot of those transactions might have slipped into 2021 closing dates, whereas had COVID not happened, it would have been, it occurred in 2020. And then also in 2021, there was a fair amount of tax policy at play, around capital gains increases, and that really kind of not forced the hand of a lot of clients, or a lot of sellers, but maybe made them pull the trigger on pursuing a sale process. Earlier had those tax policies not been in place. So overall, we kind of see that from a macro aspect where there's a great amount of deal value or deal activity in 2021, and a lot of that activity was really built around private equity firms. They were very active in this space, and I think we saw a little bit of an entrance of them into the market around this time during COVID, because of they realized the insulation that the government contracting space provided. That additionally, there were certainly other factors at play, such as low interest rates, which helped with the cost of debt. And then additionally, banks had a ton of liquidity and they were looking to deploy that as well. So we saw a great deal of activity from private equity buyers, and as noted in the bottom here, there's some significant private equity exits that occurred where private equity portfolio companies were selling, exiting out of their investment, whether that was 3, 4, 5 years after the initial investment. But some examples of that are the Carlyle sale of Novetta to Accenture, Enlightenment Capital's sale of 1901 Group to Leidos, Veritas Capital's sale of Allianz to Huntington Ingalls, and then HIG's sale of WBB to Serco. And as we look into 22, I think a lot of the trends are going to continue. As stated before, that there are macro factors that were at play at 21 that might not be as prevalent in 22, but from an activity standpoint, we're not expecting any sort of a slowdown of any large degree. So you can go to the next slide, please. So as we think about what really drives value, I think there's a couple different ways to look at it. And you can look at the value that you think your business is worth internally. At the end of the day, the value of your business is really what the market's going to price you at. And as the market prices and looks for synergies and rationale for transactions, I think there's a couple of different components that make that up. And as we've highlighted here, we group them into 4 buckets, but they kind of in descending order there. Starting at the top, you probably have the least control as a business owner or from a BD perspective over these factors. And as you move down the list, I think that you do get a lot more freedom and liberty to kind of pursue these things and differentiate yourself. I think it's important to start by saying that it's not one of these factors that drives value, but really a combination and of all these facets. Starting with the macro forces, again, these are things that are a little difficult to control. Certainly the market in which most of the individuals on this call on the call play in, which is the federal contracting space, that was seen as a safe haven during the pandemic. The federal contracting space did very well during this time. And I think, a lot of buyers saw that as an opportunity to kind of protect themselves in circumstances where, there's a lot of uncertainty in other parts of the market. So certainly from a positive standpoint, in this space, the macro forces have been in our favor. As you move down the list, kind of the scalability of the contract base, it's important that, as you go to market, that there's things you can control and things you can't control. But, as highlighted in the Array deal, there was recently awarded contracts that were providing a great deal of backlog and revenue visibility, which gives the buyer comfort that the revenue that we're projecting has, a high degree of certainty for it to, be realized. And so that's one piece that's important, and certainly the backlog piece is one of it. And then as you think on the forward-looking nature of this, there's also the pipeline and making sure that your pipeline is in line with your current performance. And as you focus on opportunity, there's different avenues to go down, but largely the combination of backlog and pipeline do drive a lot of the value there in the contract base. And certainly in the core business fundamentals, as I said, these are items that as you go down the list, you have a little bit more control on, but certainly the profitability and kind of financial profile at large are important factors. We see this a lot with a lot of our clients, certainly in the middle market area, where the management team is an important piece of certainly of the business, but also of the plan going forward. And we see a variety of business owners and different ambitions with what they want to get out of a sale. Some people want to exit stage right after day one. Others want to kind of stay on, and then we even have some that kind of want a second bite of the apple and will roll over part of their equity into the new entity. So there's a variety there, and it's important to kind of define that upfront, as that is a big kind of consideration from a buyer's perspective on the success of the business going forward. And certainly if that a key management individual holds those strong business relationships or kind of is the lead of a BD BD team, that becomes difficult if they're trying to exit stage right, and gives buyers maybe a little bit more heartburn about or just concern about the ability for that to realize what the forecast is. And then certainly just moving on to the last bucket there, the specialization and differentiation. That is something that, as I said, you go down the list that you can control this. This is really, really differentiating factors of businesses, and as listed, proprietary technology, unique business models, and then certainly some of the things that you can focus on from a BD perspective, getting on vehicles and then aligning yourself with funding priorities, as we spoke about earlier in the webinar here. You can go on to the last slide there. Thanks. And then, here I think this is another way to look at how we view some of the value drivers in the government contracting space. As echoed, it's not one factor here, it's not two, it's really the culmination of all of these. And as we look at businesses, we'll kind of analyze where we see these, on a case-by-case basis, where each individual is strong, neutral, and weak in each of these areas. And certainly that helps with our positioning of the business as we go out to market. But it also makes it transparent from a seller perspective on maybe where a buyer might dig in. So as we look at all these factors, it's important to note that many of our businesses are going to have some that have there's a weakness in them, whether that's they're too concentrated in one area with a customer, or they have a contract that's driving a majority of their revenue, or a large majority of their revenue or their contracts are coming from restricted contracts. So there's a great deal of variability across our clients and the government contractors in general on where they would fall in this mix. But it's definitely something that, as we look to value a business and look to provide insight and go to market, these are definitely considerations. And I guess maybe I'll end with the restricted contract piece. As stated in the Array deal, they had previously been largely restricted. And I think, that caused some issues from a marketability standpoint, and they internally decided that it made sense to focus on that transition. And while that transition's hard, it takes a lot of time and effort and money. The back end result was definitely positive for them. When we went out to market with them, having a large majority of full and open work really drives value up as well. So it's not to say that restricted contracts and contractors that have a majority of restricted contracts won't sell. There's certainly avenues that we can present that would give a buyer comfort that that work would continue, or that there's a plan in place to kind of convert that work over. But certainly, as you think about some of the key things that buyers are going to dig into right away, having majority of restricted contracts does sometimes raise concerns, and that varies across industry to agency. But in general, we like to kind of show some momentum there with our clients where there has been a concerted effort to try to transition that stuff over. But again, that goes to kind of a broader theme here, where there's not everyone is strong across the board here. So again, there's a positioning aspect that goes into each one of these. But I think largely that's what I wanted to focus on today. Certainly we have a fair amount on our website. We had just come out with the 2021 kind of year-end review that goes in depth into the different markets we cover, and certainly recommend looking at that on our website. And certainly if there's any questions, I'm easy. The contact information's in the slides here and easy to be contacted. So appreciate the time again, and yep, feel free to reach out with any questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Jamie, and thank you to our great speakers and everyone who attended the presentation today. The recording and slides will be available by close of business on Monday. Thank you to our panel, and we look forward to seeing you next week as we cover doing business with guidance.